Day 3 is an absolute trip after you have a baby. This is usually the day that I am just like sobbing from the moment that I wake up to the moment that I go to bed. Every single time I have been told that I've needed to get up to pee, I've been like, what are you talking about? I feel like I have quite literally been hit by a car. How long will you bleed for and how much bleeding is normal? But there's actually the least support available in the 4th trimester of all of the trimesters, and that is like arguably when you need it most. What is up, you guys? Welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you are new here, my name is Beth and I make all kinds of motherhood and lifestyle videos here on YouTube. And today we are diving into a topic that I've actually never made a video about before, and that is the postpartum experience. So this video is going to be kind of like postpartum 101, postpartum survival guide, basically everything that a first-time mom needs to know about postpartum, not from an expert by any means, but more from like your internet bestie kind of vibes. I have just come out of the 4th trimester for the 3rd time in a row. I had 3 kids in 3 years, so the whole like postpartum experience is very fresh in my mind. And this time going through it, I basically wrote down everything as it was happening to share with you guys what I wish that I had known going into it, the things that are maybe a little bit unique and you don't often hear someone sharing with you, so that I could lay it all out for you guys and you can go into it a little bit better prepared than I was. So if you are currently pregnant, congratulations. You are probably very well acquainted with the whole world of 1st trimester, 2nd trimester, and 3rd trimester, wherever you currently find yourself. What we don't often talk about as much is the 4th trimester, and that is the 12 weeks basically from the moment that you deliver your baby up until when they hit that like 3-month mark and are no longer considered a newborn. It's very interesting because the 4th trimester is just as important for your health and for baby's health as any of the other trimesters, but I have, at least in my own experience, found that there's actually the least support available in the 4th trimester of all of the trimesters, and that is like arguably when you need it most. You are in this deep recovery after having a baby, your whole life has changed, and a lot of the time you're just kind of left after you get discharged at 6 weeks from whatever care provider you've worked with to figure it out. So today we're going to talk about it, and we are going to start from the literal moment that you have your baby. Immediately after you give birth to your baby, you enter into the first moments of postpartum, and what to expect in that moment is going to vary a lot based on where you've given birth and what your birth has looked like. A lot of times people will refer to that first hour as the golden hour, where you have your baby up on your chest, but for a lot of people that's actually not what that situation looks like. In my first birth, there was some concerns about my baby's blood sugar level, so she was like immediately whisked away from me, and I didn't get her back until a little bit later. And I know for C-section moms, sometimes that is also not the case of having that golden hour. So don't put too much stock in that, but generally you'll have some sort of period up with your baby on your chest. And during that time, you'll want to work at establishing a first latch with your baby if you are intending on breastfeeding. And that is also usually the time that the care providers in the room are looking to take care of you. So if you need stitching, it might happen in that first little bit after birth. But there is also something that happens in that first like couple of hours afterwards that I did not know about going into my first birth, and it is this like stomach pushing that happens. So after you deliver your placenta, and this can kind of vary when that actually happens for you. When I was in hospital and on Pitocin, they wanted to encourage that delivery to happen almost immediately after I had my baby. With my other 2 births, because they were at home, we waited a little bit longer to actually deliver the placenta. But once everything is out, your care team is going to want to make sure that like everything is out. And so for the next like hour or 2 after birth, you might have to go through this process of like stomach pushing, where it is quite painful. They will push on your stomach and kind of like use a downward pressure just to like see the tenderness of things and to make sure that everything has been properly delivered, because you don't want to have anything left. But I did not expect this the first time around, and it was so painful after already having delivered and already needing stitches and all this to then also have this stomach pushing. So note that that might be something that you experience within the first couple hours. But another thing that I did not expect right after giving birth is how quickly the care providers would want to encourage me to get up to pee. Generally, the rule of thumb is that you want to try to go pee by yourself within 4 hours after having birth, or if you've had a catheter because you've been induced, when that catheter is removed. And every single time I have been told that I've needed to get up to pee, I've been like, what are you talking about? I feel like I have quite literally been hit by a car. And when you get up, regardless of how smooth your birth experience goes, you might also feel like you have been hit by a car. It's a very bizarre thing because the first time I had an epidural, so standing on my feet again, I thought that had the biggest part to play as to why I felt so like jello-y and off. But now also after having 2 home births, I can confirm that although I was a little bit more stable, it still definitely felt like my body was in shambles after standing up again. And you just have this very kind of like disconnected, loose, everything is out of place kind of feeling on your way to the bathroom. So you may need help with that. You may need your partner, a doula, a nurse, a midwife, whatever to help you get to the bathroom. But just also know and expect that you'll probably need to get up at some point pretty soon after to have your first pee. The first full night with your baby, you may even be surprised by how much your baby actually sleeps. I remember that being kind of a weird thing the first time around because I had heard that newborns don't sleep and are up all night. And so while I was uncomfortable and still awake from the adrenaline myself and from the nurses coming in and out, I remember just staring at my baby who was peacefully sleeping there and thinking like, this isn't that bad. Like I'm wide awake, but she's fast asleep. And this kind of varies from baby to baby because not all of my babies did that, but a lot of the time babies will sleep pretty well for that first night just because of the shock of the experience of them coming into the world. They're genuinely just so tired. However, don't let that set a precedent for you of what the next few days or weeks are going to look like, because there is also something that is referred to as second night syndrome, when their babies start waking up through the night multiple times and oftentimes not settling and just wanting to be held. And there is a good chance that this is what sleep is going to actually look like for the next couple of days, if not weeks. Your baby is going to be up at night. They're going to be cluster feeding. They're going to want to be close to you, and all of that is normal. There is not really anything that you can do in that very beginning newborn stage in terms of like schedule hacking or like sleep environment hacking to try and prevent that, because this is a normal thing that babies do to be close to you, but also to establish a breastfeeding rhythm and routine. So again, although this is not one size fits all, and even all of my babies have varied a little bit in this sense, most babies are generally up every like 2 to 3 hours as newborns when they are trying to establish those patterns of feeding. This is also generally, again, how often they will eat throughout the day, although I would highly encourage that you do feed them on demand and don't kind of tie yourself to a clock or a timer for feedings. I have just found that most of the time, even feeding on demand, those feeds have usually always happened every 2 to 3 hours during the day, and also unfortunately every 2 to 3 hours overnight. A lot of care providers will also encourage you to wake your brand new baby up in the middle of the night beyond that first night if they are sleeping longer than 3 hours, to make sure that they are getting enough food and to establish a breastfeeding rhythm. But that will also depend a lot on who your care provider is, how your baby is gaining weight, what feedings are going to look like. So if your baby is sleeping longer than that, then definitely check in. But again, on average, that every 2 to 3 hours is kind of what you can expect. In those very beginning stages, when you have a very sleepy baby and they are awake for such little periods of time, I often just focus that time on a couple of things, and that is establishing breastfeeding, but also on just establishing a connection with them and talking to them and singing to them. And then obviously as they get older, those wake windows will stretch, and that is when you can start to introduce more of those things that will help with your baby's brain development and cognitive function as well. When it comes to learning and play for babies and toddlers in our house, we absolutely love KiwiCo for that. KiwiCo offers a subscription line for babies and toddlers between 0 to 36 months that is full of researched back toys to help your baby lay a foundation for learning by engaging all 5 senses through play. With the subscription, you will get a delivery every other month, and it will be full of toys and activities and also helpful information for you as a parent that will support you through that next 2-month chunk of your baby's development. So on their website, you can actually preview all of the different crates for those 2-month periods and see kind of what's included in there and all of the different things that they help support in that developmental stage. But essentially they offer a few different versions of the subscription to cater to every family's unique budget. And with Panda Crate Plus, which is what we receive, we get that bi-monthly crate that has 3 to 6 stage specific toys in it that are super high quality, as well as their Wonder Play guide that gives us information about where our baby is currently at in that specific stage of development, as well as one Grow With Me toy that is really great to introduce at that age, but also will be something that your baby will continue to play with as they grow as well. Now that our baby is 4 months, we just received the Let's Discover crate. It comes with this super cute little rainbow crinkle cloud that introduces the beginning stages of sensory play. It comes with these soft rattle blocks that they can use to practice things like grabbing and stacking, wood transfer discs so they can practice that coordination of passing things back and forth from hand to hand. It's got a bath book that is really fun because you can dip it under the water and it will reveal all of the different colors on the page. A silicone teething ring, since we know babies love to mouth, especially between 5 to 6 months. And then also a really cool knot ball that helps to promote dexterity and holding on to it and things like that. So we have just absolutely loved our KiwiCo Panda crates for our babies and also into the toddler stage. They have just been the best resource for our family. I feel super confident setting my kids up with these toys, knowing that the research has already gone into it and it's gonna help support them in learning the things their brains are already hardwired and hungry to learn at that stage. I can also seriously vouch for the quality of these products. They will hold up very well for your family over time. But I think one of the coolest things that I have seen now, seeing my oldest daughter that has been playing with KiwiCo toys since she was a baby, is just the way that it introduces learning at different stages and builds over time. We had the Let's Look crate for her when she was 19 to 20 months, which came with all of this color mixing stuff. And the other day she saw blue and yellow sitting side by side and she said, when you mix blue and yellow, it makes green. And I was like, yeah, you learned that from a KiwiCo crate. So it's just a lot of fun to see those beginning stages of learning be built on month over month, and we can really thank KiwiCo for that in our family. If you guys are interested in checking them out, they have given me a code and discount for viewers of my channel. So all you have to do is head to kiwico.com/BethBaby. And if you use the code Beth at checkout, you can save 20% off your first crate. Again, the link for that is in the description box, and it is kiwico.com/BethBaby and code Beth at checkout to save 20%. So I know you guys are gonna love it. I know your babies are going to love it. And thank you so much to KiwiCo for working with me on today's video. Another thing that I did not expect was how noisy newborns are. I remember leaving the hospital with our first baby and being like, finally, our house is going to be quiet. We can actually sleep in between her night wakings because there's not going to be anyone coming in and out of the room. And I remember putting our baby in her bassinet and waking up like what felt like every 10 to 15 minutes because she was just grunting. She was making little wheezing sounds. She was heavy breathing, and it wasn't anything that was like out of the norm. If you hear breathing and it sounds like actually concerning, or you're seeing chest retractions or anything like that, that's different. But a lot of noisiness is actually normal for newborns, and that threw me off because I'm a very light sleeper, and every time I heard a sound, I was just like very on edge. So incorporating a sound machine can help a lot with that, not only for your baby, but also for you, to just help you get used to the fact that there is now another human being in your room, and they're not always the most quiet. Now that you know that you will continue to be up throughout the night, what can you expect out of your days? Well, babies generally will sleep anywhere from like 14 to 17 hours out of a 24-hour period. And so a lot of the time, those days are spent seeing your baby awake only for like sometimes 10 minutes at a time, all the way up to 60 minutes at a time for some babies. But I think the more average range for that is like 30 to 60 minutes at a time. We found with all of our kids that we were really having to work hard to get them to wake up to eat because they are so sleepy during the day, and they have something that is called day and night confusion because in your womb, it was dark all of the time, and while you were walking around during the day, you were actually lulling them to sleep and teaching them to sleep while you were up and going. But now that they are here and in the world, you are laying them still at night in a dark room, and because they're not getting as much movement as they were in the womb during the day, they think it's time to be awake and to be up. And so that like day and night confusion usually lasts anywhere from like 6 to 11 weeks for some babies. And so you might find that you are spending a lot of your days with a very sleepy newborn and having to work hard to get them to wake up, we would often find that just taking our baby's clothes off sometimes was enough to bother them enough to wake up. Now let's talk about some of the not so fun stuff. Around day 3 to 5 after having a baby, sometimes as early as day 2, for most women, your milk will come in. Day 3 is always the day that I have a note reminder in my phone to text my friends who have just had a baby, because day 3 is an absolute trip after you have a baby. It is the day where all of a sudden the hormone rush and just like release after having your baby, and the hormones that are associated with breastfeeding are just like at an all-time high. It is the time when your hormones from pregnancy are starting to kind of regulate now that that is behind you, and because your milk is coming in, hormones that are associated with that are going crazy. So in so many different ways, day 3 is just like a floodgate of milk and tears and some really crazy emotions. Because of all of that, day 3 postpartum, all 3 times in a row now, has been, I think, my hardest day of postpartum recovery. The birth is behind you and the pregnancy is behind you, but you're starting to feel that sleep deprivation really set in a deep way, and your boobs are a lot of the time very engorged. So you're uncomfortable down here from birth, but you're also now uncomfortable in a whole new spot. Your boobs are probably feeling a little bit sore from trying to get a latch going. And so while there is some relief in the sense that it's like, okay, I can actually like establish breastfeeding now that my milk is here, it can also be, again, just very uncomfortable and sore. And I also have just felt like sad on day 3, even though I've been so happy that my baby is there and it's fun to adjust to this new life. The hormones can definitely take a toll, and this is usually the day that I am just like sobbing from the moment that I wake up to the moment that I go to bed about literally everything and anything. So make a note for yourself to give yourself a ton of grace on day 3 or day 4, sometimes even day 5. It varies for everybody when that actually happens, but I have found that day 3 is the most consistent for myself, and at least the friends that I've had go through this as well. If you are experiencing a lot of engorgement and just pain, the 2 kind of most helpful things that I have personally found for that have been hand expression, just kind of like massaging around where the ducts are, and then also warmth. So there are some brands that will sell these actual things that you can like microwave and put around your boob to just give it a little bit of warmth. But in my experience, the like best thing for this stage has actually just been taking a really warm shower and then just kind of giving it a little bit of a massage to try and get some of that milk out. You can also use something to help relieve the pressure to collect letdown or pump a little bit to take the edge off, but you want to be careful with all of that, because if you go too crazy with pumping and with products like the original Haka that actually encourages more milk production, you can end up with an insane oversupply. And this has happened to me a couple of times where I've been making way too much milk for my baby because I started out engorged, tried to get some relief, and then just kind of perpetuated this insane amount of supply, telling my body that this is what my baby needs to eat. You can definitely take the edge off by pumping, but if you do that, just know that it might actually impact supply. And sometimes the better route may even just be that warm shower, just kind of massaging to help get those ducts empty. So we've talked a little bit about milk coming in, but what about bleeding? Because we all know that that is happening postpartum. How long will you bleed for, and how much bleeding is normal? The bleeding that you experience postpartum is actually very unique. It is not a period. It is not just bleeding from a wound. It's actually bleeding that has so much purpose in your healing process. And I remember learning this and just being absolutely mind blown. Postpartum bleeding immediately after birth is called lochia, and that specific type of bleeding lasts generally 4 to 12 days, but bleeding in general can last anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks. Lochia is the process of your body releasing all of the blood, the mucus, and the uterine tissue that is associated with pregnancy and with birth. The first type of lochia bleeding that you will experience will usually be dark red blood, and that will feel and look a lot like a heavy period. That generally lasts for 3 to 4 days and might also be associated with some mild period-like cramps. And with that initial lochia bleeding in the beginning, some small clots are normal. And please note that this is not formal medical advice, so definitely get your care provider's rule of of thumb before going into it. But generally what my care providers have told me is that if it's larger than like a Canadian toonie, which is kind of a coin like this size, and then you also experience large rushes of blood after that, that is definitely when you want to be calling in backup, because that can be an indication of postpartum hemorrhage. After that first stage of heavy dark red bleeding, you will enter into the next stage of bleeding, which will last for another 4 to 12 days. And this is a little bit like pinkier in color, a little bit browner in color. It's more watery looking discharge. The flow on this is pretty moderate, and at this stage you should be seeing less clotting or honestly no clotting at all. The final stage of lochia is actually a yellowish whitish kind of discharge. This is where the flow is really going to slow down. You're going to see some more spotting. You do not want to be seeing any clots anymore, and this stage can last anywhere from like 12 days to 6 weeks. Now, bleeding after this stage can still be normal depending on what your birth experience looked like, what your recovery is looking like, but also your physical activity. And that is something that kind of threw me for a loop multiple times, is that I would spend so much time just relaxing, laying low, thinking my bleeding was pretty well done, and then I would feel comfortable enough to go out on a long walk, and I would come home and I would see it bleeding again. This is not like a cause for emergency or anything like that. It's just a sign that your body is still in that healing process, and so you don't need to be concerned if you see a little bit of spotting or a little bit of bleeding beyond that 12-day mark. Almost always I've seen it kind of stop and start based on physical activity, but it is a good reminder that your main priority and focus during this stage should still be slowing down and healing at home. After you give birth, you have a massive wound in your body that is the size of a dinner plate, and that is where your placenta was. And so when you think about the severity of the wound that is existing inside of your body, although you can't see it, that doesn't mean that it's not there. And so that is why it is important to relax. And this is where you get the concept of the 5-5-5 rule that I'm seeing people talk about a lot more these days. And the 5-5-5 rule is basically where for the first days after recovery, you want to spend 5 days in bed, very low key, relaxing, laying down. The next 5 days you are spending on your bed. So you might be sitting up a little bit more, maybe folding laundry while you're on the bed. But for the final days, you are spending them 5 days around the bed. So you can kind of venture out a little bit more, but you still want to be very close to that bed. And this is all just to kind of anchor you and remind you of the fact that you do have a massive wound, and to make sure that you do prioritize the time of healing for that. Everyone has different products that they prefer for this postpartum recovery stage, but for me, when it comes to that initial days of just like bleeding and laying low, I really love the Freedom Mom disposable underwear with like really heavyweight long pads. I find that people generally go back and forth where they either love that setup or they love the disposable diaper underwear situation. I've never loved the idea of the adult diapers. I think because even just the pads can sometimes make me feel like restricted and gross. So I like being able to change the size of them based on where my bleeding is at. And with an adult diaper, you can't necessarily do that. So my preference has always been the Freedom Mom underwear. They're so comfy. I wish I could wear them just in my day-to-day life, but I'll do that with a heavyweight pad. I'll generally also line that pad with Tux pads for cooling and for healing down there. And then the Freedom Mom Peri bottle is amazing for getting up there and cleaning things out in between bathroom breaks, as well as Clariderm spray, which I absolutely love for birth prep, but also for the postpartum period. Those are the key things that I generally like really leverage in that first stage of postpartum bleeding at home. Next thing I want to touch on here is poop. The first postpartum poop can be so scary, and it might happen the day after you give birth. It might be a couple days after you give birth, but you don't want to wait too long, because that obviously just leads to constipation and can make it more painful for you to do eventually anyway. I highly recommend in your postpartum care journey incorporating a stool softener if you can, maybe some sort of magnesium supplement, because that's also helpful for going to the bathroom, but also a probiotic. Keep your body hydrated, because that will also help with going to the bathroom. And if you're feeling very nervous about it, try and get like a little stool that you can prop up onto your feet while you're sitting on the toilet for better form. I have just always found that that has been really helpful for the first postpartum poop. And try not to be anxious about it, because I don't know about you guys, but I always just put pressure, no pun intended, around pooping postpartum, and that always makes it worse for me. So definitely try and stick to those supplements, hydration, and let that poop happen. You're gonna be okay. Another fun thing that you might experience postpartum is sweating. Some people experience postpartum sweating all the time after having their baby. Some people just experience it at night, which is generally when I would struggle with it the most. But basically, because of the dramatic drop in your hormone levels, your body is doing everything that it can to try and regulate yourself, and that's usually where the night sweats are coming from. So I have also heard that the sweat and like postpartum smell is also associated with breastfeeding because it helps your baby figure out where you are and help them latch, which I think is honestly just kind of nasty, but it's all the mechanics of birth and postpartum. It's very interesting, but it's also frustrating because you don't want to be sweating all night, every night, and that is something that I have experienced. So prioritize loose clothing, get a mattress protector. I 10 out of 10 recommend a mattress protector because whether it's the postpartum sweats or blood or baby puke or whatever it is, like there is a lot that is happening on the bed postpartum. Just know that the postpartum sweats might be coming your way. I did want to touch just a little bit on breastfeeding and those first couple of days of getting started. Although I'm not an expert, I have done that process 3 times now, and I feel like there's a few things that I just wish that I had known going into it. So the first thing that I would say is try to focus on making breastfeeding a comfortable experience for you. I found that the first time I was just getting myself in these crazy weird positions trying to make a latch happen, and I ended up getting something that they refer to as mother's wrist, which is basically when you're like twisting and turning your wrist in a crazy way trying to help get your baby to latch. And so finding a pillow that I loved, I personally really liked the BB Hug Me pregnancy pillow because I could mold it around my body, but propping my baby up and bringing my baby to my breast instead of my breast to my baby was like the biggest thing that helped me to get a better latch. And that is the whole thing that you are going to be looking for and people are going to be encouraging, is getting a good deep latch for your baby. So you want them to have like a wide open mouth and then to close in on that and not have it be right on just your nipple, because if it's just on your nipple, that's how you end up with cracked nipples, bleeding nipples, painful nipples, and that is bound to happen to some extent as your baby is figuring out what latching looks like and as you're figuring out kind of how to do that. But a lot of people will recommend that you kind of like squish your boob a little bit, almost like a hamburger, into their mouth to help them like make a big wide mouth and then latch down on it. The weird thing with latch is that almost always in the beginning, it's uncomfortable because it's a new feeling. But once you've established a good, like strong, solid latch, it shouldn't actually hurt very long beyond that initial few days of figuring it out. If you're experiencing breastfeeding discomfort, and even regardless of that, I would say to plan for breastfeeding discomfort because it just comes with the territory. I cannot recommend Silverettes enough. I have tried all of the breastfeeding creams and ointments and things that you can get, prescription, natural, all of it, and nothing has worked for me like Silverettes. It's a very weird thing, but silver has healing properties in it. So basically between feedings, you'll just put the Silverettes on your nipples inside of your nursing bra and leave them on 24/7 in between feedings, and basically while the silver is there, it's healing your nipple and helping to prepare it for that next feeding. So for my last 2 babies, I used those and experienced very little pain with the intro to breastfeeding because it really did help heal them in between. So I highly recommend those. I'll put a link for them in the description box. But again, what you really want to look for is a good latch, and I think especially as a first-time mom, because you don't necessarily know what that looks and feels like, getting another opinion on that is very helpful, whether that is from your midwife or your OB. But in most cases, I would actually recommend trying to go to a lactation consultant, even if you do feel confident in your latch, just because having their opinion on it can be so helpful, especially because they are going to be the best resource for you if you are struggling with latch and if you want to confirm whether your baby has any oral ties, like tongue ties or lip ties, because those do impact latch. And if you don't catch that stuff early, it can have huge impacts on your breastfeeding journey overall. So I really do recommend getting a second opinion on that latch from an LC if you can. And if you're ever feeling really painful with breastfeeding, or you're noticing that your baby has a shallow latch, a really great trick that you can use is just taking your pinky and kind of sticking it into the corner of their mouth and just gently kind of pulling a little bit and lifting. And that often will break the suction of the latch and your baby will pop right back off. So you can try and help them relatch again with that that deeper mouth. So I hope that that makes sense. I am no expert in this area, but I do really recommend connecting with a lactation consultant that can help you sort it all out. The last thing that I want to talk about today is postpartum emotions. As I mentioned, these crazy up and downs of emotions can really peak when your milk supply does come in, but it can extend beyond that. It can happen before that, and it can look so different for every person. Some people actually find that their mood stays relatively stable after having a baby, but there is also so many reports of things like postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, and just moms feeling alone in that because the postpartum period can feel very isolating. There is something that I have experienced with 2 of my babies now that is called the baby blues, and apparently up to 80% of women experience this. But basically for the first week or 2 after having a baby, you can experience overwhelmedness, sadness, moodiness, emotional highs and lows, and just a general sense of discouragement overall. Baby blues, although they are very hard, are limited in the sense that after that 1 to 2 week mark, a lot of the times people's hormones have regulated enough that those really low feelings start to pass. However, when those feelings don't start to pass and they persist and you continue to feel that worry or sadness, a lot of the times that can actually be a sign of postpartum anxiety or postpartum depression. And in those cases, I always recommend filling someone in and telling someone that you need help. Finding someone to talk to, whether that is a family member or a friend, or making time for therapy, are all so helpful in helping to make sure that you get you to where you need to be, because prioritizing you and your health is also going to be so critical in this season of postpartum recovery. Like I said back in the beginning, you will probably feel this shift that takes place postpartum where it feels like a lot of the energy that was placed on you while you were pregnant has now been shifted onto this baby. And so all of your care provider appointments are mostly centered on the baby. When family and friends come over, they kind of just want to see the baby. And so as a mom, you're dealing with this crazy overwhelmedness of like, my whole life has changed. I'm so tired. And I also just feel kind of like I'm not being seen. So in addition to making sure that you tell people how you feel, try your best to also prioritize the things that are going to help to fill your cup. So stay hydrated, do your best to maintain a healthy diet. Once you can get up and moving, even just going for light walks and getting some sunshine on your face can be so huge. Make time for friends and doing things that you love, whether you are watching a movie with a friend, holding your baby on the couch, or reading a book that you're really into. I am also a huge advocate for supplementing and taking what you need to make sure that any nutritional gaps in your diet are filled, with sleep being so low for you. And the other kind of postpartum care thing that I would highly suggest that you do around the 6-week mark is when you go and you get your discharge appointment from your care provider, go and see a pelvic PT as well. I remember after having my first baby, hear the OB tell me that everything looked good and I was able to start resuming all activity, and I just felt this like heaviness down there. It was so uncomfortable. I did not feel well. And I remember a friend telling me like, you need to go see a pelvic PT, because as much as OBs are good to just like look at everything and say good to go, they're not the specialists in pelvic function and how all of that is connected from a childbirth perspective. So I went to a pelvic PT, and sure enough, I was dealing with prolapse, and I had also lost feeling in the area where my stitches had been. And so there was still more recovery that needed to happen, but because I heard the OB say good to go, I was like dealing with mixed feelings around all of that. So definitely make time for yourself to go and get that second opinion from a pelvic PT, because I know that your world has just flipped upside down and so much of your attention is going to this little baby, but it is also important to place some emphasis and attention on yourself as well, and that is okay. I think the best gift that you can give it to your baby is a happy and healthy and healing mom. And so taking the time to even watch this video and to get yourself prepped for the postpartum stage, knowing what all of the things are to help kind of support yourself through that period is going to be so huge, because your life has just flipped upside down and you have gone through this crazy experience of bringing a baby into the world. And that requires a lot of grace, but you as a person also require a lot of time and attention in your healing process. And so I hope that this video can be one small element of your postpartum recovery being smoother for you, whether it's prepping you for what to expect or even just encouraging you along the way. You are about to do the most beautiful thing that a human being can do by bringing a new baby into the world. And what a gift gift from God, that is. So just know that you've got this, that this period can be full of so much joy and so much life. I look back on all of my postpartum experiences now, and they are some of my most favorite times in my life. Even though there's so much craziness and stuff that you need to adjust to, I honestly love the postpartum period. I think it's such a special time of healing and bonding with your baby, and so I hope that you guys have the smoothest postpartum experience. If you are expecting, I would love to know what your due dates are in the comment section. And then of course, as always, if I've missed anything in this video that any moms who are watching that have done this before can kind of fill in the gaps on, whether it comes to bleeding, breastfeeding, afterbirth recovery, whatever it looks like, share your best postpartum tips and hacks in the comment section below. I did also want to remind you guys that if any of you are interested in checking out KiwiCo for your babies, that I have a discount with them. So again, the link for that is kiwico.com/BethBaby and code Beth at checkout to save 20% off of your first crate. Thank you guys so much for watching and for being here. And until my next video, I love you guys. I'm praying for you guys, and I will see you soon.